Welcome to Lead Her Higher, a podcast sharing the stories of women transforming education through leadership. I'm your host, Emily MacLean. Today's conversation is with Ceci Gomez-Galvez, the elementary school English as an additional language coordinator at Saigon South International School in Vietnam. Our conversation is all about leadership rooted in language, identity, belonging, and advocacy, and what it truly means to lead with humanity in multilingual, multicultural school communities. You're going to love her insights on redefining success as psychological safety and challenging monolingual myths in education, as well as her honest reflections on navigating leadership as a woman of color in international schools. Let's get into it. Let's start with her story. Well, a very happy new year, everyone. Happy 2026. I'm so pleased to be back to share more leadership stories and lessons as part of the Lead Her Higher podcast. Today, I am thrilled to have Ceci Gomez-Galvez, international educator and EAL coordinator, joining me from Vietnam. Ceci, welcome to the Lead Her Higher podcast.
Thank you, Emily. It's such an honor and a pleasure to be here.
Well, I am really excited for today's conversation because I think it really speaks directly to leadership rooted in identity, belonging, language, and advocacy, topics that I feel are especially important in today's schools and systems. But before we get into all of that, I love to just start with the beginning with your story, because leadership is so rarely a straight line, and it's often shaped by moments we didn't realize at the time. So I'd love to just hear a little bit about what drew you to the work that you're doing today, the work with multilingual learners and English as a second language learners.
Leadership to me is such a heavy word because it's very differently defined in international schools. You know, if you're a leader, are you an admin? Are you a middle level leader? Are you just a leader within your community? I'm very fortunate that being the elementary school EAL coordinator at SSI, through that experience, I've actually been able to hone in some of those leadership qualities and leadership skill set that are often defined as being able to lead a team of teachers, which is something that I do. I work with the outstanding expert level mastery team of EAL teachers in the elementary school of our school. And I'm fortunate that I get to guide them in the work that they do with students. So I'm not working with students directly. And I think that that's one of the parts of leadership that sometimes kind of it's missed out in international schools when you're a leader. You can work with students, you can get that opportunity, but right now I am working through teachers with students and for that impact on student learning. And I guess, like you said, it isn't linear. I didn't really think that I would be stepping into a leadership role. I had always been an EAL teacher in my career. One of my biggest successes in my career has been to collaborate and partner with other teachers and do co-teaching collaboration and do co-planning. And I think that it was that skill set in the end that was thought about when the EAL coordinator position for the elementary school was created at our school. They wanted a true collaborator. So I think that that skill set was definitely something that has supported me in being able to lead a team now within the work and the role that I have now. And because I've always been an EAL teacher and as a bilingual person, as a multilingual learner myself, I think that the work that I do is also geared towards my own experiences, like how I grew up as a bilingual person, how I grew up as a multilingual person, the experiences that I've had with languages and cultures, because those two things are kind of intertwined, and what that has meant to my identity as well, and my sense of belonging within international school communities. Like I said, it's a very heavy word to say, leadership, because although I'm not an administrator, I do lead and guide a program and a group of teachers that has direct impact in building teacher capacity and student learning.
What really stands out is how your experience becomes really about empathy and how empathy becomes action. And so, for so many leaders in the EAL space, I often find that they carry invisible stories that deeply inform how they show up with their students and their families and the teachers
Yeah.
that they work with. And I'm hearing that already in just a little bit about what you've shared. And I'm really curious of how your shift from moving from students to teachers has felt for you, and how have you really grown into that teaching and coaching capacity there?
I'm not going to lie, it's been a rough move because right before I came into this leadership role, I was working with high school students. And I think that is where I found my niche, just working with eighth, ninth, 10th graders. I kind of feel like that was my this is where I had always wanted to be. This is this is the age group. Like this is that chrysalis moment for some
Mm,
of our students where they start really seeing themselves in what they're learning, and it starts really directing them in the path that they want to go into adulthood. And so when I shifted that and I actually started working in elementary school again, that's when I started thinking about I love working with students, period. And I also want to have an experience where what I do can be trickled down even wider. And so it was a tough move, but I think ultimately it has been the right one because the impact that I have seen of the work that I'm able to do with teachers, I see it, and it's a magical thing to see. It's magical to see students benefiting from the collaborative work that we do within our team.
mm. When you're working with teams, you have such a wider impact on so many more
Mhm.
students, which is something really
Yes.
exciting to be a part of. And growth in leadership often means letting go of maybe what's worked, what you're talking about being with the students in the older grades and releasing this
Mhm.
idea that you have to have all the answers all the time. And with that evolution, especially for women in leadership, it can be both empowering and a little bit uncomfortable. So I wanted to just zoom in on you and who you are now as a leader. How would you describe your leadership today after this evolution?
Well, it definitely something that I've held on quite a bit and I've learned and relearned is really centering the humans that I work with and that I collaborate with. I love building that community within the team that I work with. I I'm really passionate about the empowerment of adults and supporting finding their joy in their work because joyful teachers make joyful students. And so sometimes in this high paced world of international schools, it's very easy to focus on the have tos and the must dos and the checklists and the testing and the assessments and all the stuff. And so I love being part of a voice that reminds them of the why and that centers their humanity and them as learners too. Because I think sometimes we forget that through these experiences, we become learners with our students. And so for them to be able to be grounded in that, I love being sometimes the person, the outsider that comes in and kind of reminds them a little bit of that and gives them that empowered spirit to focus on their own humans in their classroom.
I really love this idea that you're raising about empowering them, but also learning alongside them.
Mhm.
And one thing I already know comes through really deeply with your leadership is this idea of advocacy, not just as a concept, but really as a daily practice with real people at the center of it. So I want to
Yeah.
lean into that a little bit more. How has
Mhm.
advocating for students and families influenced your sense of purpose as a leader?
They say always be the adult that you wish you had when you were a kid. And so for me, when I think about myself as a student, I think about who I would have wanted to advocate for me in different situations. As a parent, as a mom, I am the incredibly proud mom of a neurodivergent, beautiful child, a perfect child. And I feel like sometimes that advocacy too, when I see it mirrored in others who support me as a parent, I want to also bring that into a space where multilingual learning can sometimes not be seen as an asset for students. And so being able to shift those mindsets and have people think really deeply have just communities think really deeply about the asset that multilingualism, multiculturalism brings to an international school education. I think that that also supports parents, supports teachers, and supports students to really think of themselves and in their participation within this multilingual ecology in a different way and in a more impactful way, an intentional way to be part of the growth of true global citizens.
I really appreciate you framing it that way because advocacy isn't about being an extra in leadership. It becomes a lens through which everything else is really filtered. And often when that lens gets sharpened, our
Yeah.
understanding of success shifts as well. How has your definition of success changed since becoming an EAL coordinator?
Yeah, that's a tough question because I think my definition of success is not necessarily like climbing a ladder or getting a better position or getting a better job, but really it's about the impact that one is able to make through not just their work, but also, of course, the advocacy and the building that teacher capacity. But I think in terms the way that I would define success is I actually shared this recently, um, that a teacher said to me, "I feel safe with you
Mm.
when I talk to you." And because we were having a courageous conversation about something, and I said, you can always come to me, but there's also other people you can go to, like there are systems. And then they told me, "Well, I feel safe with you, and that's why I'm coming to you." And I don't know that there is a better compliment or if there's a better reassurance that the work that one is doing is successful other than a person telling you that they feel safe with you, whether it's a first grader or or somebody older, an administrator saying that. I don't know that there is a better indicator of success than that.
It's such an honor to be able to hold people in
Yeah,
such a vulnerable space. And I think it's such an important redefinition of what success is, especially in systems that are so outcome driven and standardized. And it
exactly.
really takes courage to pause and ask, what is success and who is that for and at what cost? And that questioning often requires a bit of unlearning along the way. So, what assumptions about language, learning, or leadership have you had to challenge along the way?
I mean, there's definitely a lot of myths around language acquisition, I think, that are out there. And the greats like, Dr. Virginia Rojas, who is a mentor of mine, and Dr. Ofelia Garcia, who is one of the trailblazers of translanguaging, and just all of these greats that exist and have come before me that have done the work around language acquisition. A lot of their work still feels like a lot of advocacy for dispelling myths of the way that individuals, that people learn languages. I feel like that's a constant conversation that I have around like what we believe to be language acquisition, successful language acquisition. I guess we go back to that word success. Acquiring a language doesn't mean more is always better. It doesn't mean also that the exclusion of other languages like primary languages or home languages will allow someone to learn a language better. And I think that those myths continue to exist. They continue to prevail because of the more traditional, old school, non research based ways that we used to do things a long time ago. And what the new research really is showing is that language acquisition, even though it's assessed kind of like in a line, oh, and you go here and the progress, and then you get to this level. But really what we're finding is that language is cyclical and it builds on itself. And it can never be separate from social emotional learning because in cultural learning, because our students who go to international schools especially hold different identities depending on the space that they are and the language that they're using. And so, and their language that they're using to learn, the language they're using to communicate, the language that they're using with their grandparents in another country. So all of these things exist in one person. And so I think that there's this myth as well that continues again to be like this monolingual myth that students need to be immersed completely in the language of instruction so that they can learn it faster and better and more fluently. And I think that that's one of the conversations that we keep having around how that is not true. It wasn't true for me. And I was raised in the 80s and 90s, and it wasn't true for me then. I was just fortunate that I had, you know, my parents valued both languages that I was languaging equally. My mom would always say, like, I don't want you to only speak English because then you can't communicate with your grandmother and that's not okay. So you have to do this whether you like it or not. And then, of course, I would learn English at school because I attended a bilingual school, and I would learn English at school. And then I would learn all of this culture that was attached to this language that I wasn't necessarily living in
Wow.
my country, but that I was learning through different means, allowed me to have two perspectives about things. And it allowed me to look at the world in a different way because I was growing up bilingual. So I think all of these, the constant conversation around what more is, or building monolingual, English only spaces or this language only spaces, I think they're really being challenged. And I think that I also know that my voice has power, and I hold a responsibility as well as somebody deep in this work. And I love engaging in these dialogues and these conversations with people and with schools and administrators and teachers, and so that we can all kind of sunflower and look at things in the same direction in terms of what we want from our students to learn and who we want them to be.
I really love hearing your perspective on all of that. Language is such a beautiful gift. I wish I had more than one language. I have a bit of French from my younger days, but I think it's something that we just really need to embrace for our young people each and every day, and continue to challenge those assumptions, even if they do make people feel uncomfortable. Leading them through this discomfort is really important.
Yeah. And I think that's part of learning, right? Emily, I love that you're using the word discomfort. That moment of like the unknown can be really scary, especially because when it's something new or something you're experiencing for the first time, and especially in international school circles, right? When your whole class is multilingual and multicultural, it can be new for some teachers out there. And I invite people to lean in a little bit to that discomfort and also embrace their themselves as learners and say what is there to learn here for me. This cannot be more than just, like, this is going to make me a better educator. This is not just a situation that I'm living right now. This is what true global citizenship and intercultural competence looks like, is me being a learner in this space as well. So although it might feel a little bit uncomfortable, just like if you're trying to become a runner and you go out for your first run and then you come back and you're like, I'm never doing that again because my knees hurt and that was awful. Next thing you know, you're like signing up for races because you leaned into that initial discomfort. And then later you were like, wow, running is really for me. It clears my head. And now I kind of want to do it, and I want to be proud of myself for doing it. So it's kind of like that same leaning in. I feel like it might be your knees might hurt at the beginning, but I promise you that if you stick with it, it'll be something that you're going to feel really proud of eventually. And it's going to make you a better person, a better teacher, a better runner.
It's one of the things I loved about international teaching. Taught a grade 5 class of 16 students, and I think I had 10 or more different nationalities within it. There are a number of different languages, and being able to have every student bring their own culture and experiences to the
Oof.
classroom made
Yes,
me a better person each and every day as I learned
exactly.
alongside them.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I know you really emphasize cultural responsive teaching and equitable
Mhm.
access for all learners. Could you share a moment when you had to lead others to really rethink what equity looks like in practice? And what did that moment really teach you about your own leadership?
Yeah, I think that there's been many moments, especially when it comes to, I mean, I'm going to use one of the most obvious examples is, standardized testing. And I think that everybody out there, teachers of students who with inclusive programs, or teachers who are really thinking through the UDL, Universal Design for Learning lens, they will be the first ones to say standardized testing might not give you the data you're looking for, might give you actually a skewed data. And so taking a step back and saying what can be some of the accommodations or what can be other assessment practices that we can use in order for us to really get the data that we want. So I think one of the things that we've kind of helped rethink is also the cultural responsiveness of certain testing and assessment tools, and whether or not our students are able to show us what they can do through those tools versus if the tool itself is not something that is meant to really get the data from students who the culture of where this of the main representation of this testing tool might confuse them more rather than help them show us what they can do and what they know. And so I think in conversations around when, especially for multilingual learners, I think one of the things that we've kind of been rethinking is how do we assess students' home and primary languages as well as their proficiency in English? Because their knowledge of their home and primary language might also help us determine whether or not a student is acquiring a second or an additional language correctly. And just having the conversation of gathering data in other languages can be tricky because it means building a system of multilingual assessment. And I think that that creates something that maybe a school hasn't seen before or a community doesn't have experience with. And how do we really standardize something like that, right? And so, but I think that having us think about if a student is having trouble acquiring English and they've been in an English learning medium for many years, could it be that looking at their home and primary language, if maybe that one in and of itself is incomplete, then that blueprint to learn a new language might be their biggest barrier, is their primary language, not the learning and instruction of their second or additional one. So I think that has been a conversation that been having over the years about how to think differently about assessment tools in that way, and how standardized tests, are really just a piece of the puzzle and not the whole thing, in terms of having a standardized assessment that might cater to a monolingual population versus a multilingual one.
Hmm. And as a leader of a language development program, you're working with teams. How do you coach the individual educators with influencing whole school practice? What leadership strategies are you really using to be effective in this space?
I think it depends. I engage in coaching cycles with teachers often, and I love being like a book and resource nerd and kind of directing people to the right resource that they might be looking for to answer a question they might have about their practice. And so there are so many contemporary, really, resources of authors who are coming up with culturally responsive practices for multilingual learners, and also the idea of textured teaching and cultivating the joy. And I'm like thinking of all these books that I quickly reference and that I always kind of direct teachers to. This book has a really good chapter around that, or book, or this resource, a good checklist for you to kind of like self-assess your practice. So that I love being kind of like a person that people can tap into for not necessarily to have the answer, but maybe directing people and asking the right questions about what they would like to improve in their practice, or maybe something that they might not be seeing, like something that is, oh, my students are not engaged. What can't I see? And so being that third person that gets to come in and kind of look at the bigger picture and kind of look past the peripherals that some people might have blocked because they're in it, right? They're in the work. And so for sure that's definitely a way. I think that changing mindsets can be somewhat more complicated, because to really shift a mindset, people have to, just like Dr. Goldie Mohammed says, we have to look within ourselves first before we get to say what is something that I want to be able to teach better, or consider a perspective in this with these students that might challenge me first, but I need to know this about myself first. And so I think that within that process of like that coaching piece, I think really tapping into the human and the purpose of being a teacher. A lot of people will have different definitions of why they have become teachers. I know I have my story. I know you have your story. And we have so many people that will say, oh, I was excited to travel and all this stuff. But when they really are in charge of 18 fourth graders in their classroom, they really look within and say, who would I have wanted to have as a teacher when I was in fourth grade? And that's who I want to be. And in order to be able to do that, you have to look within yourself first, internally, in order to know who you can be the best version of yourself as an educator externally.
It sounds like you're really using coaching to meet teachers where they're at. And that adaptability is such a powerful leadership skill, especially when equity work can sometimes surface some resistance as well, that's rooted
Absolutely.
in deep fear or habit or misunderstanding. And I know, as I said before, empathy is a huge part of the work that you do. When a colleague resists a more equitable approach, how do you lead through that resistance while maintaining that trust and collaboration
Yeah.
that I know you do?
Yeah. My therapist recently said there's a really great saying in Hebrew. It's better to be wise than to be right.
Mm.
And I think that that has really grounded me in the meeting people where they are and the strategic way of looking at certain situations. We want to be able to continue a dialogue for understanding and not have somebody completely shut down because we pushed too hard, or we didn't find the right time, or maybe we didn't ask the right question. Everybody's on their journey, really, and sometimes when there is resistance, there is, like in cognitive coaching, there's the story beneath the story, right? We know that there's something bigger there. And so I love this. It's better to be wise than to be right, because even though sometimes you might have the answer, exactly, there's this part of you that's like, what is the right thing for me to do now versus what is the right thing, period, right? Like what is the right move right now? And I think that it's better to be wise than to be right.
That really just centers the relationship and the person in those
Yes.
conversations. And again, going back to meeting them where they are and how you can move forward together in
Yeah.
the best interest of students. I want to shift slightly now and talk a little bit more about leadership through a gendered lens,
Yeah.
because we're really talking about women influence and navigating systems that haven't always been built with us in mind. So,
Hmm.
in a field where advocacy and equity work are crucial, how has being a woman really shaped your leadership journey?
Yeah.
And have you experienced moments where your voice opened doors or created barriers you had to navigate?
I mean, wow, this is a great question, because I think that the way that I've navigated international school spaces, especially, there's a lot of responsibility in me being from a place that not a lot of people that you meet in international school places are from. Like, you don't get to meet a lot of people from Guatemala, or with my story. I feel like sometimes it's like that danger of a single story, right? I think that people might have perceptions of where I come from, and because I am a woman and I identify as a woman of color as well, I think that that part too, it's part of the identity and the perception that people might have and the biases that they might bring into spaces. So when I was in my younger years and I had trouble navigating moments of my voice not necessarily being heard or valued, or being called too passionate, or being called too loud or too much, and not really knowing where that was coming from, not really knowing how to be a better version that would be heard more, or how to also make the women in my family proud. I didn't want to go to a space where I would be silenced, of course, but I also wanted to get my message across. So I think one thing that I did in my younger years that I don't regret, but maybe I would have done it differently, knowing what I know about myself now, not what I know about other people, because other people may continue to be an enigma. But knowing what I know about myself now, what I did when I was younger is that I over professionally developed. I don't know if that's a thing that people say, but I remember going to critical friends training, becoming a facilitator for protocols, adaptive schools. Like, I did all of these trainings to kind of go like, Ceci, you need to be better in these spaces because your voice isn't being heard. There's something you're doing wrong. There's something like your voice is not, like every time he's like, oh, you're too much. You have to find a way to kind of like insulate yourself a little bit more. And I think that within that, I did this and I did that, and I became this facilitator, and I could name things immediately, like a protocol, and all these sentence frames for probing and clarifying questions, and I became a master. And I was still having those moments
Mm.
where I was too much or too passionate or too this or too that. So for me, I had to do the thing where I was like, okay, I need to know, what am I not seeing, right? And I will never forget, actually, Alisa Perreras, who is part of the ALOC community. And I will never forget going to a conference where she talked about how she basically got to the point where she was like tired of being told she was too much, and she was tired of telling her voice was too loud. And I remember hearing her story and for the first time seeing myself in that story and seeing myself in somebody else, in another Latin American woman who identified the same as I did, like a mirror of myself, who was saying, I don't want to silence myself. I don't accept the narrative that has been said about me being too loud or too much. In fact, that has only made me want to build my own table. And I remember her saying that and it impacting me so much in that moment because it was the first time that I allowed myself to give me permission to be who I am unapologetically and not shrink myself in spaces. And I remember hearing Alisa also say, I got to represent. I'm privileged enough to be in spaces like this, and I know my voice is power. And I said to myself, my voice has power too. And I wanted to have the right kind of power. Navigating spaces in places where you are a woman of color, you are a woman whose primary language isn't English on paper, and you're navigating a lot of English speaking spaces. And I think that that is when you have to be the truest version of yourself, not even the best version. I don't know if that exists. I don't know if you can, but the truest version of yourself is the one that doesn't betray you. And is the one that you bring into spaces where you can't go wrong because you're being true to yourself, to your voice, to what you know. And I think that moment for me was when Alisa said that. I was like, this whole time I've been looking for what am I missing? And the whole time I've just I've just had to find better ways to be present in those moments for myself rather than for other people. And so, yeah, I think it's a difficult thing to navigate to be a woman leader in any instance. And also looking for those moments that remind you of who you are and hold a mirror to you. I think looking for those moments, looking for those people, looking for that community, I think is really important.
So, with all that you've learned about yourself and on your journey, what would be one piece of advice you'd give to women who are stepping into educational leadership,
Mm,
especially in the areas of equity, language, and
mhm.
access, where the work can feel very urgent and sometimes a little bit
Yes.
heavy?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, definitely find your people. Find your people that can continue to remind you. I always say that I wish my friends could see themselves through my eyes, and I want that to be reciprocated for me too. Like I want them to remind me who I am when I can forget because things can get heavy, things can get intense. Sometimes I need that mirror for myself. I know that I needed it with Alisa, and I know that I need it every day when I reach out to my best and closest friends. So having that community is really important because the work of equity can be very lonely, especially because what you're advocating for is the dismantling of a system. It's not necessarily people. It's like the dismantling of a system that can have roots that go really, really, really deep. And so I would say definitely that community for sure. And also, I know perfect by any means, and I make mistakes all the time. So be graceful with yourself. You won't always say the right thing. You won't always have the correct answer. And yes, your voice holds power. So be accountable for that. Be willing to admit when you are wrong. Be willing to admit when you have hurt others, whether unintentionally or inadvertently, like own that for yourself because that grace, that self forgiveness, it's the only conduit for truly being happy. It's just recognizing yourself beyond what other people might think of you or what other people might expect from you is knowing your true self again and showing up like that all the time and that humility part of it too. Be humble, right? And recognize also that you are powerful and your worth.
Such great advice. I really appreciate all of those points so much. And so this brings us to one of my favorite segments because of her, where we shine the spotlight on someone who supported us to getting to where we are today. And on our very first episode of Lead Her Higher, Liz Cho named you, Ceci, as someone who's really made an impact on her leadership journey. So now I want to turn it over to you to name another woman who has led you higher, either a mentor, a leader, or a colleague, someone who's really impacted you along your journey.
Well, and I just want to say to Liz, like, she is definitely one of those people for me. Absolutely. And when I listened to that podcast, I cannot tell you how much my heart grew, and it is an amazing thing to be seen that way by your friends, both in a personal and a professional capacity. And I am so lucky that I can name so many women. I am so lucky. When this question was put up for me, it was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to choose? And not to say that I'm going safe with this one, but I have to say that it's my older sister, Gabby. And it's funny because I don't usually talk about my family so much in the international school world. You know how we live those lives where mostly what people know about us is what they can immediately see. But my older sister, Gabby, she had the weight of being the older sister in my family. There's four of us. My brother and my sister are twins, and they're the oldest. And then there's me, and then there's my little sister, who is considerably younger than I am. She's about 6 years younger than I am. But my sister Gabby and I are like a year and a half apart. And boy, did she carry the weight of being that older sister. And she was, of course, she was the best student. She's a doctor now. She's like all of these things. What she continuously reminds me in her being, in her existence, in the way that she is a mother to my beautiful nephew and niece, in the way that she is a doctor and a healer of people, in the way that she works in a career in Guatemala which is dominated by men. And in a way that she lives in a very complicated society. Guatemala is a very hard place to live, and she does it all. But what she always reminds me is about how showing others when you are proud of them. It doesn't have to be this big accolade, this big trophy, but sometimes it's just like, man, I just love you for all the things that you are, because she's known so much of what both her and I have gone through growing up very similarly. And so when I look at her and I see all that she has accomplished, and then she looks at me and all that we have accomplished, and we both go like, well, that was against the odds, but we did it. I think that there's a certain validation there of survival, of grit, and of self advocacy. And when I think somebody who has always believed in me since we were little kids, it will be my sister Gabby. And every time that I talk to her, every time that I reach out to her, every time when we have hard times with each other, when we have the best times with each other, I can't think of anybody else that I would want to know me this deeply more than my sister, Gabby.
As a fellow big sister, I think Gabby sounds fantastic. And I love that she has always believed in you and seen you for who you are, the incredible woman that you are, and continue
Oh,
to be each and every
thank
day.
you. Thank you, Emily.
So let's shift gears for a little bit of rapid fire, fun and fast questions to end off our time together today.
Hmm.
What's something that leaders don't talk about enough?
Mentorship.
What's a habit or a practice that helps you lead effectively?
I I want to say organizational skills.
And what's a leadership skill that you had to learn the hard way?
Yeah, strategy, building a
Mm.
strategy.
And are you a morning early riser or a late night worker?
I am an early morning riser for sure.
What's one thing that people might be surprised to learn about you?
That I don't learn languages easily.
That does surprise me.
Yeah. It took me forever to learn Italian, and even now I can only order food and wine. That's really the extent of my Italian capacity.
Well, those are important words to know, that's for sure. And our final question, what does lead her higher mean to you?
I think it means, I think it was mentioned before, you said opening doors, breaking that ceiling, but most importantly is mentioning a person's name, mentioning her name in a room full of opportunities.
Well, Ceci, thank you so much for showing us what leadership looks like when it is rooted in advocacy, courage, and deep care for students and communities. Your voice reminds us that equity isn't a program or a checklist, it's a daily commitment. And it's leaders like you who make this work visible and possible. I am so grateful that you have shared your story today with us. Thank you so much,
Emily,
Ceci.
I am so grateful to just be here with you and share this moment and space with you, and thank you for elevating my voice as well.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Lead Her Higher. I am so grateful to Ceci for sharing her story and reminding us that leadership grounded in language, identity, and advocacy has the power to create belonging, safety, and a lasting impact for students, educators, and the entire school community. Until next time, lead with courage, lift others up, and always lead her higher.